Hello, everyone. Welcome to our panel. We're excited to be here with, we have a group of really esteemed experts in the areas of privacy, cybersecurity, and artificial intelligence. And we're excited to welcome you to our Privacy in the Age of AI panel. I think this is an area that is obviously top of mind for a lot of people right now. And in particular, beyond folks who practice in privacy and cybersecurity as an actual practice area, it's something that's really found its way into all lawyers' practices in some form or fashion. It's impacting employment law issues. It's impacting intellectual property law practice, and just the way we practice as lawyers on a day-to-day basis, the technology we use and how that's evolving and what that's going to look like. We're going to talk. The panel's going to talk about some key issues they're thinking about and key concerns they have, and try to share their knowledge on some topics. And then we'll try to save some time at the end for questions as well. I'm going to start by introducing the panel. Dr. Cavoukian is recognized as one of the world's leading privacy experts. She served an unprecedented 3 terms as the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario. There she created Privacy by Design, a framework that seeks to proactively embed privacy into the design specifications of information technology, networked infrastructure, and business practices, achieving the strongest protection possible. In 2010, international privacy regulators unanimously passed a resolution recognizing privacy design as an international standard, and since then it's been translated into 40 languages. In 2018, Privacy by Design was included as a key component of the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, and Dr. Cavoukian is now the Executive Director of the Global Privacy and Security by Design Center. She is also a Senior Fellow of the Ted Rogers Leadership Center at Ryerson University and a Faculty Fellow of the Center for Law, Science, and Innovation at the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. Kathy Ossian is of counsel to both Young Basile, Hanlon, and McFarland PC and Schuster Law PLLC. She concentrates her practice on information technology transactional law. She assists technology companies with contracts, terms for online and mobile applications, and privacy policies and practices. Kathy is the managing editor of Social Media and the Law, first published by the Practicing Law Institute in 2013 and updated annually. She's also an adjunct faculty member at Oakland University, where she teaches a course in cybersecurity law and ethics. And Nareg Froundjian is a technology lawyer at Ossian, Martineau, and Dumoulin LLP, a national Canadian law firm. He advises some of Canada's leading institutions on data protection issues, including startups, and with a penchant for cybersecurity breach preparation and response. He also provides subject matter expertise in the context of corporate transactions and contract negotiations. In his downtime, he enjoys running, camping, traveling, and bemoaning his unsuccessful gaming career. My name is Christian Ohanian. I thought, in the spirit of this panel and what we're going to talk about, I actually, a few days ago, asked ChatGPT to actually write my bio for me. And ChatGPT would tell you that I'm a senior managing counsel at MasterCard and practicing in privacy, AI, and data responsibility, and that I am a professor at the University of Nebraska College of Law, where I teach cybersecurity and cybercrime. It would also tell you that previous to that, to my current position, I was an assistant general counsel of the National Security Agency. It would also tell you that a completely separate human being previously practiced law, also named Christian Ohanian, previously practiced law at Dickinson Wright PLLC in Michigan for a number of years. Interestingly, both of those Christian Ohanians are in fact me. So that's a little bit of a window into one of the issues I'm sure we'll talk about today, which is accuracy and reliability of results that come out of artificial intelligence. So to set the stage, I want to turn it over to Dr. Cavoukian to share some of her initial thoughts on some of the challenges we're experiencing right now with respect to artificial intelligence.
Thank you so much. Do I need that? It's over here. I have a soft voice, although my husband would tell you otherwise. This is great. It's really wonderful being able to speak to you here today. I was 4 years old when we moved to Canada. I was born in Cairo in Egypt, and when I was first born, my mom told me that it was under British rule, and they had total freedom. They had a beautiful home. I have two older brothers. I don't know if any of you have children. Rafi is my brother. He's a very well-known children's musician. Anyway, after 4 years though, I'll tell him that. I speak to him every day, I'll tell him. So when the British pulled out and Abdel Nasser came in, everything changed overnight. My father, who had a big photographic studio, was told he couldn't work for anybody else. He could only do Nasser's work. All the banks were shut down. You couldn't take your money out. Freedom went out the door. And to Armenians, freedom is critical. My mom told me they got ready, they started packing up, and they left shortly, 2 weeks after that. They left, they couldn't take any of their money with them. They left on a boat to Canada. 3 children, two grandmothers, and 8 suitcases. Can you imagine going from total wealth to nothing, and you give it all up for freedom? This is what is so important. The work I do in the area of privacy, I want to remind you that privacy forms a foundation of our freedom. It's absolutely critical. You cannot have freedom without privacy. I will never, ever give up on that, no matter how difficult it becomes. And it is becoming difficult with AI. And let me be clear. AI can simply extract massive amounts of personally identifiable data from hundreds, thousands of databases, extracting all this personal information, of course, without your knowledge or consent. It is completely unacceptable when that is the model that is used. But let me also be clear. I created something called privacy by design, which is all about positive sum, not zero sum. It's not about privacy versus security or privacy versus AI. No, get rid of that dated zero sum model. It's privacy and fill in the blank, privacy and AI. How do you do both? So I talk to a lot of AI tech people in terms of the need to ensure that personally identifiable data is scrubbed before you engage in AI, and then run with it, do whatever you want. AI can result in amazing outcomes. There's no question. It can also create hallucinations of the kinds that were recently described. So you also have to be cautious. But generative AI can also produce new non-existing data or images. I mean, we have to be very careful on the accuracy or lack thereof associated with AI. And so when I talk about AI, and I always read, this is a great book, How AI Thinks. I read to grasp what are the essentials. And some of the essentials are absolutely critical. And that's why when I talk about positive sum, the enormous value of AI, once you've addressed the privacy related issues, are enormous. I read recently that when surgeons are removing a tumor, what they want to know is the skin around the tumor. Is there any cancer cells associated in there? And it's very difficult to find that out. You have to take it out, send it to a lab, get a result, which takes far too long. They now have an AI tool that they can insert that can immediately identify the if there's any cells around the tumor that also need to be extracted. It's amazing. And I say that as someone I've had a lot of neurosurgery. I've had 5 brain surgeries. I'm great. So I want to tell you, just in case any of you have any trouble, call me. I'll make you feel better because you can recover from anything. You just have to be so darn patient. But AI, enormous value. What we have to do is be proactive, embed privacy by design at the outset, meaning address the privacy related issues, the personal identifiers linked to the data, scrub them, then you're golden. You're good to go. And how you do that and where and the motivation we can discuss. I don't want to take up too much time.
Thank you. That's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I think, one place that might be helpful to go from there is, Kathy, I know you have some thoughts you wanted to share too, before we even continue to deeper dive into some of the issues about helping, as lawyers. I think one of the key issues whenever we're dealing with any kind of issue is to define it and to make sure that we do that first. That puts us in the best position to deal with it in whatever way we need to and address it. Do you want to walk us through a little bit, maybe some of the different kinds of ways to define artificial intelligence, what they are, what they're not, and so forth?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. So artificial intelligence, it boils down to it's the ability of a computer system to perform tasks that are typically done and require human intelligence. So things like learning, decision-making, problem solving. AI essentially mimics those human intelligence activities. And the two primary types of AI are generative, which Dr. Ani did mention generative AI. That model actually creates new content, such as Christian experienced when he asked it to create the bio. It creates new content using pre-existing patterns and data. So that's where you can get kind of wild new content data that may not even be true, right? It's just it's made up, if you want to think of it that way, or a hallucination. By contrast, there's also adaptive AI. And what adaptive AI does, it learns, adapts, and improves based on real-time data and changing circumstances. So you basically are building that model with a set of data, and the AI is using that, adapting that, and I think that is used a lot in medical situations and certainly has potential for a lot of applications, including medical applications. So adaptive AI is learning from that new data, adapting from that data to improve the decision-making and the process optimization.
Well, I think the key challenge when it comes to privacy is something that Dr. did mention, which is if you're going to build a model, if you're going to put data into that model, you want to make sure that that data is de-identified and properly de-identified. So going back to the medical setting for a moment, we in America we have HIPAA, which covers personal identifiable medical information. The benefit of doing it right and de-identifying that data, and there are regulations you can find under HIPAA how to do it.
Oh, we have HIPAA here in Canada.
Yeah. So it can be done. There's guidelines to follow. You can do it that way, and if you do it that way, then you can put that data into your model without worry. You don't have to worry about complying with HIPAA or other data privacy laws, right? Yeah. So that's one way that it needs to be addressed, but it's got to be done properly.
What for you is I'm looking to have a focus on some security issues. Is this something you're seeing? How is artificial intelligence this way in your practice one way or the other? Y'all talk about it when it comes to maybe save that for a little bit later. We're seeing it come up a lot in the context of contracts, clients that are concerned about how their data is going to be processed when they share with a third-party service provider. So I think that's one of the key areas of concern that has been coming up, at least in the last year, is to say, okay, well, I'm sending my data there. I have a clause that says, okay, you have the right to generate statistics, analytics, etc. We used to brush those clauses off, saying, yeah, of course, it's going to be de-identified. It doesn't matter. Now people are pausing and saying, wait, does that mean you get to feed it into a large language model, train your data? Where does that end up? Is it being done in a way where it's de-identified? And I think there's importance between de-identified. So perfect anonymization or perfect de-identification is an anonymization. It's impossible to directly or indirectly identify something, right? But otherwise, just for the concept, you don't need somebody's name, address, social insurance number to know who they are, right? So you could say this person is male or female. say maybe they attended the Armenian Bar Association event. Maybe we can say they were on a panel. Maybe they can say they were, they had a short haircut, etc. Right? So you can, by narrowing it down in that, you can pretty much figure out who it is. So if we take all of that data and feed it into a system, it still remains personal information. And depending on the laws, Canada, US, Europe all have different outlines on, or different lines where data goes from being merely personal information to de-identified personal information. Those lines are kind of blurring right now. People are asking questions. Quebec, for example, just enacted recently legislation that put definitions to it. Canada tried to table similar legislation 3 years ago. Canada's been trying to pass national legislation on certain definitions. It's been a challenge. People are asking questions. That's the important thing, that procurement lawyers or in-house counsel or et cetera are coming to us and saying, well, where do I draw the line? How do I operationalize this? Because AI is not going away and we have concerns.
Where do you think, just because you mentioned this, I think we should grab it for someone else. What are your thoughts on effective practice of law in terms of what you're seeing?
Oh, too bad.
Also, so I think that there's different ways of using it, and of course, I think everybody's heard the headlines of AI is hallucinating, it's inventing cases, etc. Okay, fine. Review the AI's output and be in a place where you can do that. You wouldn't trust a student that's just come up with anything. You need to control the output before it goes to a courtroom or before it gets to a courtroom. So that's pretty much the basics. But then AI is fast. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't have work-life balance. And if it's 11 o'clock at night, question, I want to do a brainstorming session. I have no problem brainstorming with AI and having a conversation and just bouncing ideas. Ultimately, I'm controlling the output, but having a discussion and just flushing out your thoughts, extremely helpful. Otherwise, redraft for clarity and concision. One of my favorite prompts, stream of consciousness, you get to draft, you get to say whatever you want, and then package that in a neat little package, bow and ribbon, send it out. What used to take some time to think, which words should I remove? How should I redraft this for clarity and precision for my audience? AI is doing that very well.
Yes, I have an example that I'd like to share. The recent California bar exam that took place, there was some, I guess, scandal in a way that arose because it turns out that the bar examiners decided to write 29 out of the 200 questions of the exam using AI. So they did that. Now maybe there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe they took Nareg's approach and they went through and they fixed everything out beforehand. This really was a problem of transparency, because it did not come out until after the exam was administered. And of course, at that point, if you are the someone who took the bar and you missed by a couple of points, and then you find out what they used AI. Well, I want my results to be updated. So because this happened and they did not disclose it ahead of time, some things have happened. The California Senate Judiciary Committee has approved a bill that calls for a full audit of the exam. The current State Bar of California Executive Director has announced that she's going to resign from her role effective in July. And then test takers, the Supreme Court in California has approved adjustments to the passing scores. So this was a situation where maybe there was nothing wrong with what they did. We don't really know. But now there's going to be this there's all this fallout as a result of non-transparency. by our examiners as to how they were using it.
I think that's really helpful. And I think that component of transparency is going to be the key. And we'll probably talk about some of the safeguards and some of the guardrails that you put up to help ensure that we're using it effectively. So Dr. Cavoukian, do you have any thoughts on this?
We just have to ensure the responsible use of AI. And we have to go to great lengths to do that. Some people call for putting guardrails on AI to contain its machinations and hallucinations, etc. There was actually a group of 75 experts who met in the UK last year on algorithmic justice, if you can believe it. And they produced a report. And the experts, these brilliant minds, Joshua Bengio, who practically created it, there was no consensus. They continued to disagree on how best to address the concerns associated with AI. And the report outlined a number of risks that they wrote, and including covered AI can cause fake content, disinformation, fraud, and huge violations of personal privacy, of course. So on the privacy front, at the very least, I work with companies so that they can proactively embed my privacy by design to their operations to scrub the data at least of personally identifiable data very thoroughly, and then, use it in ways that you would consider useful. I've created something called AI ethics by design after my privacy by design. So if you're interested, I can share that with you. But we just have to address the potential harms. It's very important.
And in terms of the question of, and I think you mentioned this in your last, the question of our ability as individuals to control data, some choice regarding, and maybe it's transparency, maybe it's also choice in terms of whether we opt out, and there's some debate as to how effective that can be in terms of personal information used to train models and so forth and so on. What are your thoughts on that?
Now, that's a really tough one because we are all very busy people. We're all in a rush. And when I think of the times when I'm searching for something and it comes up and it says, oh, we use your personal information, we want to do this. And you just say, yes. We are all in a rush to get things done. I urge you to resist the temptation and to always, if possible, if you have the time, say, please remove the personal identifiers. My personal identifiers, I don't want them linked to the data. And then feel free to use the data in the ways that you envision, that you've revealed to me. But personal control is absolutely critical. And that has to come from you, largely speaking. I work with companies to try to introduce personal control levels, etc. But you always have to do a check on that. So that's the model I always try to advance. And when I talk to people, I talk about the need for transparency to promote accountability. It's absolutely critical. People have to know what you're doing, what they're doing with your information. And then the ability to interject your wishes in terms of personal control of your personal data, that you don't want to use it for any unauthorized purposes by unauthorized third parties, and that you want your data, your identifiable data, locked up very tightly for that first reason you gave it. And then for any other uses, scrub the data completely of personal identifiers. Then they're free to use it in ways that they
Sure. So I'm hearing you about setting right of trying to meet price policy that reasons possible. And yet remain extremely well informed. Is the current model of legislation and the way we incentivize privacy by basing it on consent as the original, is it still viable in the age of AI? And I'd be curious to have the thoughts of my panelists, because for everything's been consent original Canadian privacy law, or as long as we have Canadian privacy law, that's kind of being called into question. If it's why we're actually recommending this question.
Well, the only thing I would add there is that unfortunately, in the US, consent isn't even the model. We don't have comprehensive, we don't have comprehensive privacy laws in the US, certainly not at the federal level. What we have are specific privacy laws that protect things like health data, or certain banking information, social security number, certain laws that directed to types of data that we protect. Or we protect certain individuals like children under 13. We have to protect their information online, or in applications, but we don't have anything comprehensive. We really rely on kind of a state by state approach, and California is one of the toughest ones, but that doesn't protect all Americans. So unfortunately, we're even behind where Canada is, because we don't even have that consent-based requirement that Nareg mentioned.
And Eric, what I would say is it would be preferable, which is what when I design privacy by design, it doesn't require an individual's consent. It jumps in before the data are used in any way. And the second principle of the seven principles of privacy by design is privacy as the default setting. That it is the default, that whatever your company is intending to do with this data, you ensure that privacy has been enacted before the data are used. So privacy as the default setting means you always must strip the personal identifiers before it's used by third parties, etc., for additional purposes. And that goes such a long way, because you're right, relying on consent, and people are busy and they need not turn their minds to it as they should properly, which I know that includes myself. So you're right, consent in itself is not sufficient. Take a look at privacy as the default setting, which means it's embedded into the system. They include that in the GDPR in Europe, General Data Protection Regulation. They include my privacy by design, but they specifically also added privacy as the default setting as one of the clauses.
Thank you. And I think, one of the other, we've started to talk a little bit about the safeguards. You mentioned anonymization, stripping out information. I think that's, an incredibly important point, because as we know, I don't think the AI technology and the proliferation and its usefulness, the benefits that it can provide us, are going away, and we're not going to want to continue to leverage it. The challenge with that, and I think the tension a lot of us see, is in order for AI technology to do some of the beneficial things we would like it to do, it has to consume significant volume. I don't even think that's that much of a difference, right? It has to be able to consume a significant amount of data to be able to do some of the really positive things, whether it's medical research or whatever it might be, like to see it do. Outside of anonymization, which is absolutely a critical aspect of being able to try and account for some of the privacy concerns on the front end. One of the other issues that's discussed a lot in this space is the concern about AI yielding biased answers. And that I think can be biased in the sense of we're concerned about discrimination of some form or fashion. Obviously as lawyers, we think about employment discrimination or other kinds of discrimination, but I think we have a clear path to follow what ranks as that. AI might come up there, but there's also different kinds of bias. There's bias that doesn't even touch on that, where it's just whatever the algorithm is, it starts generating and predicting a certain outcome, and then it starts assuming that's correct, and it'll kind of continue to just populate whatever comes after that in a certain way. And you may just end up, again, in the example of medical research, even if it's not connected to what we would consider a discrimination issue, maybe it'll just start biasing what the result is to create a problem of accuracy. I'd love to hear from the panelists on what your thoughts are on that concern, and what your thoughts are on, what you see as legitimate ways to try and address that issue.
Well, I think it's being addressed through use. In general, it's not all the AI systems concerned about, but what are AI systems where the output AI or the decision that an AI wants to make would have a significant impact on life or on the way we shape our societies, right? So that's your criteria for breaking within the scope. And then it's to say, okay, so those systems have to go through a impact analysis before being deployed. So these impact analyses typically will consider privacy considerations, but also impact on society, impact on human bias analysis before being deployed. And that's the kind of language that we're seeing. The other piece that exists is also just to make sure that you have a human. And when you don't have a human to be to speak to the point of transparency that we talked about is to disclose that this decision about was generated purely by here's your opportunity to ask for if you're not satisfied on that decision. Start here. Can you describe a little bit what that entails? Yeah, so most laws are drafted by saying if a decision was exclusively made by an automated processing of personal information, you have to disclose. So counterpart to that is to say, well, it's not exclusively made by an AI system. There's a human that is verifying this information before it's verifying the information there before making a decision. There's some contention about how involved the human needs to be, right? How many of you rely on your GPS? How many of you follow it almost blindly? There's hands that are, so that's kind of where the issue is. Like, even if there's a human, even if you have agency, even if you could be steering the wheel, even if you could be thinking, oh, right, wait, the AI is saying there's traffic on GPS has a bunch of data that says there's traffic here, there's no traffic there, etc. Oh, but my dad told me that the road was there. Okay, so I'm going to avoid this road, or I know that this road has potholes, I'm not going to take it. Those are from Montreal. The road following something. Michigan is familiar with potholes.
Okay, so there are some U.S. states that are concerned that have enacted some laws directly on this issue of bias. For example, Illinois has a law that was enacted last year that takes effect January 1st of next year that prohibits the use of AI in a manner that results in illegal discrimination in employment decisions and employment review. So,
Michigan?
Illinois.
Oh, Illinois.
Illinois, yes.
Right. Violence is abounding. There is no question. And how you deal with it, especially in the context of AI, it's called scraping, which goes to thousands of databases and scrapes all the personal information. It's an enormous concern. So we have to deal with it. Like me, I just want to make reference to one thing though. I never want to make my messaging totally depressing. So I was trying to think of what positive development. There's a company that was just developed last year called Private AI, and they're amazing. It's every company's compliance roadmap is unique. They go into the company and they simplify the journey of getting the data they want to extract. It helps the business navigate regulatory challenges, but always ensures that any personally identifiable data contacted is separate, stripped, complete, immediately. Then they work with the company to use the data in 10 ways. So when you think there are companies called private AI, developments are happening. It's beginning. So we don't want to give up. We just want to continue to stay the course and make sure privacy is strongly protected.
I think that's fair. And I have my personal experience for financial services sector. On the positive side, and as lawyers, when we talk about a variety of things, we see risks, we see issues, and sometimes, and that's very natural. That's what our job is. I am also actually, even with all the things we've been talking about today, I'm actually an optimist when it comes to this technology. I think as soon as we take certain steps and are thinking about the things that we can do to control for some of the issues, I actually am an optimist. I've seen, personally, with respect to financial fraud, we've seen how using AI, embedding AI in terms of trying to prevent financial fraud, especially considering The bad actors, scammers, cyber criminals, and so forth, they're already using AI to supercharge what they're able to do, how they're able to do what they're able to do. And so the ability for not just my company, but many other companies to be able to deploy AI-powered solutions that are able to, if not keep up with, at least try to come close to matching the scale of preventing, using data responsibly to try and prevent, financial fraud incidents, to try and figure out where compromised information exists and so forth and so on. So I do think this technology can be used in a really beneficial way. And I think, and this is, I think, a good pivot to something, Kathy, if you want to talk a little bit about the regulatory landscape, provides background. And just, one of the things I think is, at least from my viewpoint, that's important in that space. And, thinking of this as lawyers, I think, one of the things that we have to always keep in mind is it's not unreasonable that we're trying to find where it's appropriate to use laws and regulations to try and get our hands wrapped around this, the potential concerns, issues, problems that AI can cause. But I think at the same time, at least this may be a U.S. perspective, looking at a lot of things from a technology neutral standpoint when we look at laws. I think you also have to be careful trying to use law to address technology in ways that it may not be effective in addressing what you're concerned about. It may have intended effects, but I think there's a balance. But Kathy, I think you had to provide some background on where we're at right now with legal regulations.
Yes, absolutely. So as I mentioned, there are some states individually who have enacted laws or are considering the enactment of laws specifically regulating aspects of it. None of those are strictly privacy laws. They may cover other things. So there's a lot of other legal issues. We've already talked about bias. Ownership, of course, is another issue, but none of those laws, as I said, specifically, they might verbally touch on privacy. They might talk about, not using someone's information to create deepfake, for example. But on the federal level, which is what I wanted to talk about, so it's kind of right now, I would describe the regulation of AI or potential regulation of AI in the United States as kind of a political football. Because in the last administration, there was an executive order, President Biden issued an executive order that was trying to acknowledge that, here AI is out there. There's privacy concerns, there's civil liberty concerns, there's other things that we need to address. And just kind of as an acknowledgement that, this is something we want to do, but at the same time, we don't want to, destroy innovation, but basically to kind of put out what I believe to be more of a kind of a thoughtful approach. Here's sort of a framework of what we should be thinking about. When the new administration came in, and of course, there's, if you follow the news at all, there's a flurry of executive orders. One of the executive orders that the new administration did was to rescind that executive order. Not surprising, I guess, right? So that happened, I think, within the first week while the president was in office. And right now, the bigger issue and the more concerning one, I think, for me anyway, and I'm watching pretty closely, is there's this bill right now that you may have heard about. That's I think it's already gone through the House. It's still being debated in the Senate. And one of the things in there that even some of the Congress people who voted for it admitted that they didn't realize was in it is the fact that it includes a 10-year moratorium on any state regulations of AI. Oh. Now, yeah. Now, maybe that would make sense if we had some federal regulation already in place, or there was one that would say, okay, we're going to pass this bill and at the same time put in this moratorium so states don't, interfere with it. But no, there is no pending state federal bill. Okay. So it would simply be, if this passes, a 10-year moratorium on states regulating AI. Some of the justification that I've heard is, well, we don't want to fall behind other countries that are developing, and we don't want our developers to fall behind. I mean, that goes so far as I'm concerned. However, to me, it's still very short-sighted. And anyway, that's kind of the state of it. So, you know, maybe if we reconvene this panel in 6 months, maybe that will be in effect. Maybe it won't. I don't know, but I did want you to be aware that it's out there.
Yeah, it's a challenge we're seeing in the space in general. I think of us are, following the space, but one of the most influential AI laws that's out there is the EU's AI Act. And as recently as I think a week or two ago, there's significant discussion about also postponing the application of that law by the European Commission. So this is changing on a daily basis. Really interesting. Dr. Cavoukian, Nareg, what my understanding is Canada maybe, I think now you may have touched on this, but was maybe starting to look at AI. Maybe there was a bill that was moving, and maybe I have that right wrong. But what is the prospect of Canada along the space from your perspective?
You can go.
Question. So in terms of legislative history, Canada is trying to reform its federal privacy law because we have one in the private sector called the trying to reform with
It's been around forever.
which has been around. The latest version was in 2015, the change that came into effect in 2019. So come 2021, at the coattails of the before making its own privacy laws, Canada said we're going to Bill C-11 the elections in 2021. And then came back as Bill C-27. So that was a privacy reform. And then within the privacy reform, at the end, they said, we're going to put Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, which was a standalone piece of legislation aimed to address AI as this amorphous blob that exists that is AI, right? Because it's hard to comprehend what it was exactly trying to target. Why? Because it said everything is going to be left up to regulations. So that part of the bill was controversial, or at least was the more controversial part. And as many of you know, we had elections some months ago. Before that, Parliament was prorogued. That means we stopped sessions in Parliament back in December. Bill C-27 is dead. And we don't have any indication that it's part of the legislative priorities of the current government to bring it back. So the big question mark.
I totally agree. The odds of seeing legislation on AI in the near future are minimal, highly unlikely. But what concerns me even more might appear in the future and how it might be designed. And this is what concerns me enormously. We have to be so careful to ensure that any AI legislation strongly protects privacy in terms of the personal identifiers that may potentially be scraped, which is how AI works. It goes to thousands of data, scrapes the data, regardless of the content in terms of personal identifiers, etc. So do I have confidence that we're going to have good AI legislation? No. Do I have confidence that we're going to have legislation in the near future? No. And I'm an optimist. But in this area, there's just too many question marks. So at the very least, when I'm working with companies, when they call upon me, I just urge them to protect their data, to protect their customers' data that resides with them in their databases, so that the kind of scraping that could be taking place won't affect their customers. You have to be proactive in this area in order to get any kind of data protection to take place.
Thank you. And then before we leave, I definitely want to leave a few minutes for questions. Before we do that, I thought I want to give each panelist a moment to provide any final thoughts you have. So now do you want to start? Yeah. I think AI, I'm going to quote a little bit of Harry Potter, right? So what did they say about more heated, great things, terrible, but great. So AI is kind of, it's a strength. Intelligence, whether it's natural intelligence, right, human intelligence, or artificial intelligence, it's just a tool. Ultimately, it doesn't have ethics, it doesn't have biases. It's a fallacy to say AI is biased. It's humans that are biased. It's being trained on a data set of human bias, recreating those biases into our society and amplifying. So AI is a megaphone that exists and that is going to reproduce the social issues that we currently have. So it's not necessarily by working on the AI that we're going to address society, but I think it's by working on ourselves.
So there is a lot of litigation going on in the US involving AI, and most of it involves ownership issues, however, and privacy. But in one of those cases recently, there was a discovery dispute, as discovery disputes happen, and the AI company was asked to retain data portions of its database. And their response, they didn't want to comply, and their response was, well, if we do that, we're going to violate the privacy rights of people within that database. So isn't that an admission that they're violating those people's privacy rights by even having the data? I mean, that to me was an interesting way to respond. And I think that's just, we're going to see more of those kinds of, I guess, ironies as this goes on.
Thank you.
The only good thing around thousands, hundreds of thousands of privacy transgressions is that it occasionally leads to some good outcome. So last year, ISO, there was a new ISO standard that was created, an international standards organization creates ISO standards that are followed all around the world. And it was incorporating privacy by design. It was all ISO PBT 31700. And this is huge because as an international standard, once that got passed, I'm now getting calls all over the world, Australia, all different parts of Europe, Japan, South America, because they're all following the new ISO standard. So that's the only good news I have to share with you. But it is good news. So we still have to continue to persevere in demanding privacy for personally identifiable data and before it's scooped on in AI. And then AI can go to the moon. AI has enormous benefits. There's no question. That's why I believe in positive some privacy and AI.
Thank you. And I think in terms of some of my final thoughts, and I think it's hard to have final thoughts because this is a continuing evolving space, but I think for me, transparency is probably one of the biggest keys for me in trying to address some of the concerns we have in the space, because I think some of the other potential approaches or dynamics I think are going to run into some inherent challenges where again you're confronting the issue of, well, if you want AI to do X, you need to train it on credible data. So realistically, yes, we're going to want to anonymize as much of that's possible, but sometimes that's not going to be possible because the outcome you're going to want the AI to generate is not going to be an anonymous outcome, right? If you want the AI to stop a particularly bad IP address from connecting to a particular server or what have you, because you want to ensure security, IP address is considered personal information. You can't anonymize it, but you know what it is. So I think the best way, one of the better ways, I should say, because I think in a lot of ways anonymization is key. We can try to bias test each other. But transparency about understanding where the clip you're getting comes from and understanding what you're seeing when you're seeing something, how it was generated. That way, somebody looking at it, whether it affects them, whether it's related to something particularly important in their life, maybe a credit application or something, or even something perhaps slightly less important, they can at least know how it was generated, and that will enable them, if they're trying to engage with the company or whatever it might be, to at least be informed about what's happening. I think that's one of the, at least at an initial level, one of the better ways to address this. But I think
We actually have 5 minutes for questions. So I want to open it up and see if anyone has questions. Just let me know if there's a particular panelist you're interested in. Yes, sir.
This for Kathy, but it might also be the federal bill you mentioned about the moratorium. That constitutional?
I mean, it's hard to say whether it's constitutional or not. I don't know where it would fit in the Constitution. I mean, if anyone has thoughts, Christian, I think it's more.
I think it's that the federal government has approved it.
Yeah,
Even the requirement.
right.
The Commerce Clause.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. Oh, yeah, you're right. Whether the Commerce Clause, how the Commerce Clause applies, whether it's interstate commerce or it's something that's really left to the state. Yeah, and they're gonna say, I think it's state commerce. But I does that.
State like moral food.
Yeah, right. So it probably wouldn't be susceptible to the Constitution.
Yes, sir.
I have a little question. You seem to be accepting the programming's world definition of AI as being based upon certain ways of coding things to learn from data. But I don't know how you can distinguish between AI and algorithm, particularly when places like Google and Facebook have algorithms that have access to almost everybody's personal data in completely unscreened fashions, and calling it an algorithm is a problem. So I'm wondering, in legal terms, how do you begin to define the domain that you're regulating?
This is a really good point, actually. It's something I was talking to colleagues work about years ago, because I actually think lawyers have played a role in defining what we're actually talking about when we're talking about artificial intelligence. In earlier places in my career, some of the places I worked defined artificial intelligence very narrowly, very refined category of certain things. But the EU AI Act and some other laws defined it far more broadly and said, okay, anything that's basically, and I'm a little bit generalized, that involves machine learning now is AI, whereas I've been in other places previously would have said, well, that's not AI, it's something else. Which is interesting because it kind of expanded the space where, to be honest, a lot of solutions that we've been using for a very long time have been leveraging what we now are particularly focused on as AI. I mean, Google and variety of these things have been using machine learning, as you said, algorithms for a long time. So I don't know, if you have any thoughts on this definitional question.
The definition of AI keeps constantly evolving. I think that's one thing that we've noticed. It's including more and more elements within the scope of AI, right? And then tools that, as you mentioned, tools that we previously used are being boosted through AIs. So let's say the initial Google algorithm, maybe it wasn't on a training on different data sets. The current Google search algorithm definitely is leveraging machine learning technologies.
First of all, Emily and very important. First, there are many associations, IPIT committee, and the AI machine learning for many years. So this is a very topic for me. And in particular, I wanted to ask you this issue from two directions. One, as you know, in Armenia, there's been a boom in IT and technology business, and many of these companies are facing these issues. Recently, we have another company, an Armenian-owned company, a unicorn, and many of these companies are in the tech space, in the AI space, and so on, and have an increasing fraction of the Armenian economy. What would be your advice to those companies in general, from the perspective maybe privacy by design or whatever framework you want to address? And from the other perspective, we discussed a number of different regulatory frameworks, whether the Canadian one, the US fractured one, or the GDPR in Europe and so on. Armenia is also currently developing its privacy, AI, cybersecurity legislative regulatory framework. What would be your advice from that perspective, for which way to go, since there isn't an established system now that you might improve iteratively or overhaul or so on, but they're just in the nascent steps of this thing. Thank you.
Good question. I would start by telling them to try to avoid the unintended consequences of AI, which means that you have to be aware of what your AI will be transpiring. What will it be doing? How will it be collecting information? How will it operate? Will that information rely on inferring sensitive personal information that is then used without obviously any consent or knowledge? Some of that information may expose a person's political leaning, their sexual orientation, depending on their online activity. There's so much that can be revealed. So control is absolutely essential and is rarely enacted, because now the absence of control is abounding through AI. And the harm that is arising because of that, because of all of the information that is extracted from hundreds of thousands of databases, which contain personally identifiable data, it's just pouring out. And now the lawsuits are coming in from the US today, where, because people are saying, what do we do with my information? I never gave them that information. I gave it to this company for restricted use, and then it's abounding. And let us not underestimate the harm that can arise from doing so. This can affect people's lives dramatically. And that's what I used to hear when I was privacy commissioner, how much it had affected their life. And when people used to come to me to file privacy complaints, the first thing I would tell them to do is, for someone process, or go to the police and file an occurrence report. Because to me, this is scandalous, inappropriate use of people's personal information. So I would start by just alerting companies and others to the unintended consequences of AI and the dramatic effects it can result in.
One advice for you can hold the other one for government starters. Don't let the lawyers drive your business. I think is the advice I would give. And I'm unqualified to speak to how they should innovate, but I would let the lawyers take a step back and let the make their sense. Lawyers are the first guy and make it start. The piece of advice for them, I think should be reinventing the wheel. Armenia is close to Europe. Europe has one of the most comprehensive privacy legislations in the world, and in fact, one of the most advanced ones in terms of conceptualizing privacy concepts and academia. To the extent that Armenia's main export market might be Europe, is to look towards their GDPR and will model that to make sure that it's a sale of products. It's easier for the market to be successful. I agree with that. I think companies are Armenian looking towards what kind of framework to get. In the same way that a lot of American global companies are still quite aligned to the GDPR and so forth, because it's still the most consistent framework that applies across the board and generally, with some exceptions, keeps, even North America keeps companies in compliance at the broadest level, at least. Looking to the European framework, especially because right now the GDPR, and something people don't talk about enough, has a number of components that regulate data itself, would not make a decision. So I think looking to Europe and aligning with that is probably the most reasonable approach forward.
And just to add to that, the EU and the USA have just announced a joint working group on AI safety standards relating to research and development. This just came out a few months ago. So this might be something that they'll be growing in Europe.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think we're a couple minutes over, but thank you, everyone, for listening.